Hello, hello. My name is Jordyn, and I'm your host. And today we have another special guest. We really just have special guests back to back to back to back to back, and we are absolutely loving it. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be on here. I've had you on my podcast twice, but I've never been on yours. So I think this is like far too long that we haven't done this.
Oh yeah, for sure. And if anybody doesn't know, he is the host of It's Not What It Looks Like, aka INWILL, and it's absolutely amazing. I love listening to the podcast, especially when he just brought on like a million different co-hosts, and it's chaotic, but it's lovely. If I'm being honest.
Yeah. All of our producers, or most, all of our producers, like, work to build episodes, but most, if not all of them, are always in our episodes. So it's like controlled chaos, but it's very fun.
Yes, we love it. I love controlled chaos because I feel like that's me every day, honestly. Yes. Controlled chaos. So, just getting into what we are going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about the lovely, lovely, lovely topic of fat phobia. We're talking a little bit about like the history of fat phobia and just all about that. We're going to be talking about specifically the scientific origin, the cultural origin, as well as the medical origin. And with that, we're just going to be talking about how traumatic it is overall. So yeah.
It is very, very, very kind of like messed up, and it also has like a lot of it just has a lot of roots in kind of everything, and a lot of people aren't really aware of how deeply rooted it is into our society. And so a lot of the things that we talk about, they're very kind of off-putting for people because we don't talk about how deeply embedded this bias is in our society. So yeah, I'm excited.
Getting past the sad stuff, I'm just excited.
I'm excited to really just crumble this topic down.
Yes, and if you guys could not tell, Chris is definitely a dear friend of mine, so it's gonna be a little chaotic. But that's okay. We love.
See what happens.
Alright, so of course, as our listeners know, we will be starting off with a Rose, Thorn, Bud segment, and for our new listeners, we will be saying our Rose, which is a highlight, success, small win, or something positive that happened today or within the last week. Our Thorn is a challenge you experienced or something you've used more support with. And lastly, our Bud is some new ideas that have blossomed or something that you're looking forward to knowing more about or experiencing. So, Chris, take it away.
A Rose, to be honest, is definitely talking about this topic. We don't talk about it enough on our podcast because we cover a bunch of topics in itself. So I'm really excited to have a full episode dedicated to this. I think that I'm just super excited for that. A Thorn is definitely dealing with Notion. Notion has been a struggle for me recently, and I don't know why. They're just out to get me. Please don't at me. Don't cancel my subscription. Notion, don't do that. I need you. And then a Bud is we haven't even announced this on our social medias yet, but I guess we'll drop it here. We're gonna be hosting a college prep week on our social media, and just talking about how to apply, just for the people who are going to be applying next year, because the college app process is crazy.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so we're going to be talking about all of that.
Awesome. We love to see it, and I absolutely cannot wait. And so, just to talk a little bit about my Rose, Thorn, Bud as well. A Rose, which is going to be something that's really weird to be happy about, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Recently, I have been prescribed Abilify, aka a bipolar medication, for the first time. Oh, yeah! So it's not that weird. Okay.
It's definitely not weird.
Okay. Awesome. I'm so glad. It's very, very nice to finally be prescribed actual going through the medication process instead of just being prescribed 6,000 medications at once in a mental health hospital, because that happened, and we're gonna talk about that in a later episode, because there's a lot of issues.
Interesting.
Yes. So yeah, that is my rose. What were you gonna say?
No, I just need to hear that story after. That's what it is.
Okay, bet. So, a thorn. I've been feeling really sick, unfortunately, due to the medication, and
Oh my
those are
God.
just, yeah, exactly, just common side effects, and I'm really, really cannot wait to get over them, and just thrive in general. Um, and then a bud would most likely be all of the collaborations that we have with INWILL, as well as just like all of the other student organizations that we are collaborating with and partnering with. And it's just going to be so amazing because, as much stress has been caused, there's also been a lot of good ideas and good
Yes.
projects coming up. So, yeah, that is our rose thorn bud. And with that being said, we can get right into the episode, get to the main topic of fat phobia. And if you guys don't know what fat phobia is, which is very likely that you do know what it is, but we're gonna go over it anyway. Fat phobia is basically the implicit and explicit bias of overweight individuals that's rooted in blame and morale failing. So, of course, this first topic is going to be scientific side of fat phobia. So, Chris, the historian here, is going to take it all away because, he's so good at this.
Yeah, so, but okay, hold on, pause. Before I do this, I do think it's worth mentioning that I am a person that's in a bigger body. Um, that's it. Like, I just wanted to put that out there because I
Okay.
think it's a little more powerful when like the story comes from somebody who is in a bigger body. And also you can just connect to them a little better. But so basically the tea of like diet culture is this white guy.
No need to name
Which is
him.
not shocking. So there's this British white guy, and during like the 1860s, and he was kind of like the first person, um, who actually wanted to lose weight and go on an experimental diet. And he tried to go to a bunch of different doctors, and they all, said, no, we're not going to do this because at that time, dieting was experimental. It had no research behind it. It was kind of like taboo during that time. But then, of course, he found another crazy white guy, a white doctor to be specific, and that doctor helped, like, agreed to help him with his experimental diet. So in 1964, this guy published like a whole pamphlet because that's what they did then versus posting on Twitter. Um, is he basically posted this pamphlet on how to diet and lose weight. It was super popular because it was a new thing, it was a new trend, and it sold out a bunch of different times across Britain. Um, and then it kind of moved into people, using scales, and people like seeing all these different like ads for this pamphlet pop up, and that's kind of when we shift out of the beginning, um, or sorry, we shift out of the age where there was no morality or like research or science that was tied to weight loss. And then we move into this era, which is also the Victorian era for history nerds out there, where like plump and pale and skinny people were seen as morally good, and curvy people were dignified as like morally wrong, or more of kind of like a gluttonous action to be overweight. And so that's obviously has a bunch of things wrong with it, but we're gonna like press on because there's a whole lot of shit to go through. I'm so sorry.
um, can you go into a little bit why the sort of Victorian? I think you said Victorian era. Yeah, how they saw plump bodies being more healthy, being more nutritious. I wouldn't say nutritious,
Yeah.
but is that how you use that word?
Well, I would say like, well, I honestly have no idea.
Okay, well.
Um, Yeah, so like before like we collectively changed our minds into seeing like fat people as morally bad, um, up until the late 1860s, people who were in bigger bodies were seen as healthy, more like wealthy and like well taken care of. because they were able to have access to like good quality and nutrient dense foods, which were not common, especially if you were poor. Like that's definitely not something that you had access to, especially in Britain. Now, when we kind of like changed like our mind, and well, like when our society kind of changed our minds and started shaming bigger bodied individuals, um, we kind of like start seeing the formation of the diet industry. And one great example of this is kind of how we, well, really not we, but people actually started creating these laxative soaps that like quote unquote washed away fat. Um, and this is kind of like the beginning of people creating these things that are like doctor supported, to help people lose weight. So that's also when we start seeing companies like start blowing up. Um, so yeah, that's not the best thing ever. Laxative soaps.
Right. Because who thought
Well,
of that? It kind of reminds me of I remember I was watching a video about all these old inventions, and there was like a toothpaste full of mercury or something like that.
yeah,
And yeah, that's kind of what this is reminding me of for some reason.
yes. So like now that you say that, this is just to keep things in perspective. A little earlier, during this, when Madame Curie was figuring out the like radium and the properties of like radioactivity, people were putting radium in like soap and toothpaste and all this stuff, because it was supposed to be healthy, and it wasn't until like a long time later where we found out that it's actually toxic and like is like a carcinogen and kills people. So just to put that in perspective, like this is just that all over again, but with a laxative soap. Um, yeah, that's not great.
I definitely can understand why. Well, it's definitely not understanding. It's definitely mind blowing how people were trying to take these sort of treatments and make it so they have an easy fix. And weight loss is never an easy fix. It's definitely something that takes time and effort. It's definitely something that is misunderstood to the point of where people made laxative soaps, because that's really just mind blowing.
Yeah. So the other thing too that sucks, about this era, or not this era specifically, but like in the late 1860s, is we're like seeing this transition from people who are, or people who are like gaining rights, like in the mid 18 the 1800s, people, especially women, were trying to gain independence. They were trying to get up, like preserve their right to reproductive freedom, getting the right to vote, all this stuff. It was like one of the greatest political times for women and also people of color. But then we also see how the societal norm of the way that we view larger bodied folks, especially women and people of color, because those are typically people who are in larger bodies just because of their genetics, and also where they are. And it's normal, right? You got to have genetic diversity. Um, and so we're starting to see this kind of like this great stride in gaining political rights, but we're also seeing a climate shift into shaming people in those bodies, which are typically people of color and women, which is rough. That's not a good look. But this is kind of like the time where we're shifting into a great like scientific and medical bias, which is not great. And this is also when like, well, not when, it's almost when the BMI index comes out too.
Yeah, and I have so much to talk about the BMI index. Honestly, as somebody who often was considered very skinny, very thin most of my life, and just seeing the BMI index and monitoring my BMI, which was something that I had a very unhealthy relationship with, honestly, because as I looked at the BMI results, it always said you are overweight and you are obese. And I was like, oh, okay. So my younger self internalized that. And when I was 9, 10 years old, I was trying to diet, trying to figure out ways to lower my weight, taking like these pictures. You know how body professionals like on Instagram have these like straight shots and then back shots, and that is definitely not called straight shots. But I was taking those at such a young age, and just because this BMI index told me so, and it was
Yeah.
definitely something that I resent to this day. Thankfully, I've evolved, but you can only imagine how many people still live by the BMI index to this day.
Yeah, and what sucks even worse is like the BMI index was never, ever, ever intended for medical use. It was a statistical exercise for a mathematician that only used European people. So obviously, it didn't count for varying
Mm-hmm.
nationalities and ethnic groups, but it also doesn't take into account like a bunch of other factors like sexual orientation, race and ethnicity, bone density, all that stuff. So like medically, it actually doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I'm glad now that we're getting into a state of where physicians and registered dietitians are starting to call out the bias and kind of like really just the like ineffectiveness of the BMI index, like to do its intended purpose. Um, but yeah, I'm like really excited to see that because it hasn't happened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it like we've been waiting for that to happen.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely, we have. Definitely just want to acknowledge how these systems have been created, especially to leave out minorities, especially to leave out, black peoples per se, Hispanic people, other groups of minorities, because they were built on just noticing the perspective of white people, acknowledging white people first rather than minorities, which is just such a universal thing. It's like even past the BMI index, but I could go on about that forever.
Hmm. The other thing too is like on that topic of like white people acknowledging white people's perspective.
Hmm.
um during or hold on, I don't even remember, like there's so much, I think, okay, yeah, so I think it's like during the 1950s. This is that's kind of the time where bariatric surgeries were coming out, and were kind of coined as like a life-saving option for
Hmm.
people who are in bigger bodies. And also like you have Weight Watchers, and you also had other groups which are a little less nice, like Gluttony's Anonymous, Fatties Anonymous, Eaters Anonymous, like all of those kind of groups were coming out in the the early and mid 1960s to basically capitalize off of the insecurities and discrimination that people of color and minorities were facing during that time. And also not shocking that a lot of these groups were run by white women. Um, that's not shocking. Oh, and then sorry, there's like so much going on because like this is also the time where like Twiggy came out. So for those of you who have no idea who Twiggy is, Twiggy was during this time was, I think, was like either 15 or 16.
Hmm.
She was an old British model who kind of like came on to like the modeling scene, and she was super skinny,
Hmm.
like very skinny compared to the average like bodied like British person. So it kind of just made this new unattainable standard that nobody could strive for, because most people don't look like that.
Right, exactly. Definitely want to just prioritize how you talked about how most people don't look like that, and especially when we don't know what that person is going through. You don't know if that person was medically healthy. You don't know if they're unhealthy, but you focus on appearance and focus on how they look, and you're just like, oh yeah, I want that, and I don't want to consider other aspects such as mental health and other, again, medical histories that the person might have, for sure.
Hmm. And the other thing too, which is like what we're gonna get into like more
Hmm.
later, but like most people who are in larger bodies aren't inherently unhealthy.
Hmm.
A lot of those bias and environmental factors contributes to them being unhealthy and not them genetically itself. It's pretty much the same way um, where like a lot of BIPOC people often have like racial stress that comes from just existing in their own body.
Hmm.
Um, it's the same principle. It just comes from bias and discrimination that they experience.
Absolutely. And it really does come to a point of where even like doctors and medical professionals are upholding that standard of just like, just because somebody looks like they have a bigger body because that means they're inherently or unhealthy. And even if you have like this underlying condition, and I'm speaking from just the videos that I've watched, I'm not speaking from personal experience. Even if you have like this underlying serious condition, doctors will still look at you and be like, "Oh yeah, you must be unhealthy because you are in a bigger body," and that's definitely a problem which a lot of people face nowadays.
Yeah, and so the other thing too to think about is that it wasn't until 1992 that the National Institute of Health actually concluded that most of those programs actually didn't work in itself. Because like that and that it really just doesn't make sense when you think about it, especially from a psychological aspect. Um, when you think about kind of food and its kind of place in our homes, food has a really strong like cultural and family element tied to it. And so when we demonize cultural foods, one of the things that tends to happen is kind of like you have shame on like your food and a part of your culture. And again, like for most people, food is a really important like part of their lives because not only does it like bring them nourishment, but it's also kind of a bonding element. A lot of families like bond over cooking meals, and there's also kind of the sense of passing down information to the next generation. And so those are some of the things that we don't talk about when we look at kind of like the mental health aspect of this issue. And that's something that we miss out on a lot, especially when we talk about this.
Absolutely. And that's kind of where we dive into just like the cultural aspect, because within a lot of cultures, there are definitely that lovingness towards food, that bonding aspect of food, like Chris mentioned. And so, yeah, let's just get right into the cultural aspect and how diet culture sort of impacts minorities as a whole.
Mhm. Yeah, so there's a lot of diet culture and kind of tied in on a cultural level. And one of the things that kind of really like pushed this into our society was the CDC. So one of the things that the CDC did to kind of like tackle the obesity epidemic that was coined after the Washington Post like made an article that talked about how Americans were fatter than ever. Um, a lot of people started kind of like practicing correlation does apparently equal causation, which it doesn't. But a lot of people were associating the fact that people were getting heavier and heavier with the fact that people were kind of moving away from diets,
Right.
especially in the late 1990s. A lot of people started kind of like getting away from the fact that like diet or like getting away from diets because the National Institute of Health announced that diets actually don't work, and most people gain the weight back plus more once they stop their diet. Um, and one of the things that the CDC did was to create kind of like obesity maps that show in what parts of the United States had the highest concentration of those people who fell into the obese categories. And for a lot of people at the CDC, they justified this by saying that the maps created a really good sense of how the epidemic, and I'm using air quotes there for those of you who are listening because it's complete crap, how that epidemic was spreading across the country, and how most people saw the fact that an increase in body weight was kind of like toxic or a disease. And so, what really sucks about this, and this is kind of where we get into like the deep kind of root racism in this as well, is the maps really showed that most people who lived in bigger bodies lived in cities and in areas that had a lot of BIPOC folks. Or really, I should actually say just minorities in general. And then people like drew this connection that most people, especially brown and black folks, were exposed to this obesity disease. And that's kind of where this cultural aspect gets tied into. And there's also that's also where a lot of the initiatives to give people with low income like access to nutrient dense foods. I will say that is a positive part but kind of demonizing like the BIPOC community with
Right.
like the obesity disease is kind of like a really, really bad negative and kind of like cancels out the positive.
Right. And you guys all know how that can play out with how racism is just so prevalent. It's so prevalent in every single part, there's I'm gonna get a little bit ranty here, but what is a podcast if you don't get a little ranty?
I know.
There's just so many things in this world that has been used to just weaponize, like weaponize just these certain subjects against minority communities. And when I heard about, or when Chris told me about the obesity maps and how they were in low income areas, I was like, oh, I already know where this is going. I already know.
It's a repeat. It's just a story on repeat.
Right. And you can never blame somebody's race just depending on, like, you can't blame race and find that correlation between race and obesity. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. But the scientists, in quotation marks, the scientists back then were just so smart, and I applaud them.
Yeah. And if like the people want to like practice correlation doesn't equal causation, then let's focus on like how the fact that a lot of the weight stigma that gets placed on minorities is just another stigma that's on them. And so that's just more stress, and stress has a very, very bad impact on our health when we have too much of it, which is what is seen as the like obese disease. Like that's complete crap. And when you also think about like obesity now, a lot of people see like obesity as a very negative term, very stigmatizing, very insulting. And so it's kind of, I don't know, just ironic that obesity disease typically gets attached to the BIPOC community, which is just another thing to stigmatize everybody, all minorities in that community.
Absolutely.
Super fun.
It's very fun, very, very fun. I mean, as you guys can tell, there's a lot of sarcasm just radiating right now. But
yes, there is.
Yeah, just going on about the little modern aspect. Well, definitely not little at all. The modern aspect of it all. You can definitely see so many jokes about obesity within the minority communities. Like, for example, even though there's just like this just light, fun atmosphere when talking about, like, oh yeah, the black aunt with the really huge arms definitely know how to cook. Like, we all know where that stems from, and especially considering like the history of it all, we don't think about how much these like memes and jokes just connect back to these sort of threads of fat phobia and the cultural aspect of it. We, as our own people within the black community, we take this stigma, we take fat phobia and instill it into our own like jokes, and that's never okay. We've internalized this sort of fat phobia and indirectly, well, I'm going to say directly, I don't know why I said indirectly, the direct racism that fat phobia has caused, and it's just absolutely bamboozling to me.
Yeah. That and the other thing, well, the other thing too, to kind of like talk about, like, I've talked a lot about kind of like where the cultural aspect of like diet culture came from. But I guess like I also kind of want to like explain how that's prevalent today. One of the things that really like genuinely pisses me off is how there's a lot of, it's usually white people on TikTok that are like, I'm not afraid of fat people, I just think they're ugly. I will say this probably about every like phobia, like homophobia or transphobia or fat phobia. It's not the fact that you're afraid of them, it's the fact that you're afraid of not wanting to admit that you have a bias against them. That's really where it comes from. That's really what it is.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, but diet culture today looks like a lot of different things, because remember that the diet culture industry is tied to the big pharmaceutical industry and also our government, because also remember that the National Institute of Health and the CDC have, I guess, in a way, incentives, not literal incentives, but kind of like an incentive to add obesity as a quote unquote disease, because then you can prescribe medications, and again, quote unquote medications, like weight loss and all these different diet plans, like keto or like the Atkins diet, whatever. And this just gives more and more money to the diet culture or the diet industries and the big pharmaceutical industries up there. And so once again, just remember that it's all a scheme for money.
Right.
Diets and diet industries don't care about your health, because if they really did, they would actually kind of quote some of them, like the weight science behind how losing weight is genuinely and generally not good for your health. Like it really doesn't like do a whole lot. But for a lot of people, it spiral. And here comes a trigger warning, by the way. It does spiral into eating disorders for a lot of folks, especially brown folks. Because, well, actually, sorry, all minorities, because it spirals downwards into all of the like discrimination and segregation and or oppression that we already face in our systems. And so it's just like adding another thing onto the pile, or like another piece of paper like in the flame.
Wait, that was
And
actually
so
really cool. I like how you said that. Is that like a common phrase? Is that a common
uh,
phrase?
no,
Oh, it's
I just
not.
made that up.
I love how you said that.
Yeah, it like really today, diet culture is everywhere. You can kind of find it like with Gwyneth Paltrow. I don't know if you heard about the crazy stuff that she's doing, but here, like vulgar warning here. Like Gwyneth Paltrow was trying to convince women that shoving a jaded egg up women's vaginas,
Huh?
was like good for your vaginal health. Please look that up. I'm not making that up. That's genuinely crazy.
Okay.
It genuinely is.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a little weird. And of course, there's also people, or there's also like companies and stuff that like, talk about like intuitive fasting. I think Gwyneth Paltrow also did that. But intuitive and fasting, those words actually don't mix because fasting is forced,
Right.
intuitive is natural, so that automatically doesn't make sense. But intuitive eating, which I'll talk about in a second, kind of just is a completely different thing from all the other diets out there. Yeah, diet culture is like everywhere,
Oh yeah.
especially on TikTok for some reason, because there's always like the podcast idiots that like to talk about how like women in larger bodies or like women who have curves are like ugly, and
Right.
I'm like they don't want you, so why are you talking about them?
Exactly.
They don't care about you, like,
Not at
but yeah.
all. Oh man, I love. Well, I'm not even gonna say love because I don't love, but the fact that you talked about intuitive fasting is just like a very
What a eye roll. For those of you who can't see, I'm
yes.
like definitely rolling.
It's such a sensitive spot, I'm gonna say, but the fact that I personally have experienced so many sort of ads about fasting and just
Mhm.
even my mother talked to me about it, talked about fasting and how it drops the weight fast. I personally struggle with that to this day, because I have been influenced by social media and because everybody talks about how amazing it is, and that just proves how much how little facts and scientific aspects are mentioned within social media, are mentioned in casual conversation, because everybody just promotes it like it's the best thing in the world.
So I'm trying to find the tweet that I posted the other day when I was thinking about this episode. Oh yeah, so my tweet says, "Why is it that every time I open up Instagram, I see ads promoting diets to me? I think you're pitching it to the wrong person. I'm fat and I'm okay with it." Like this is it. This is such a beautiful tweet. But like, why do I keep seeing like detoxes on Instagram?
Right.
Detoxes are complete crap. Like that's why we have kidneys. Um, Seriously. Like how do you think people like in the early 1900s like survived when they were drinking a bunch of alcohol? Like, do you genuinely think that they were like doing celery juice detoxes? Just saying.
Not my mother having a detox kit in her in the kitchen right now.
I'm going to at her so bad, like not on purpose, but like especially when we start talking about like the science behind stuff now.
So we definitely got way off track here, but so we could definitely switch from
You're back.
the cultural aspect to the medical side, or
Yeah.
the medical aspect of it all. So if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so what's nice about kind of tackling diet culture is that you just need to have taken intro bio. That's it. You just need to take intro bio. So a couple of things to kind of get off the page first. Number one, morbid obesity. Obesity over what? Like, what's the average for being chronically overweight? If everybody is different, everybody's DNA is different, everybody's cultural, environmental experiences are different, how is there a standard? How is there a standard if healthcare is supposed to be individual?
Right.
Because not everybody goes through the same thing. Not everybody has the same experiences, and not everybody has the same access to nutritional food. So how can there be a standard?
Right.
The other thing, the second thing, is Weight Watchers. I hate Weight Watchers so much because it's complete crap. Like, they've rebranded themselves like all the time. Like, no, there's like points.
Yeah.
At one point, like Weight Watchers like counted fruit as like points towards like your total because it had a bunch of sugar in it, and I was like, you're done. You're done. You're done.
You're done.
So yes, but what's so funny about all of this, we can talk about like how diets suck as much as we want, but the National Institute of Health, that's recognized everywhere, denounced diets.
Mm-hmm.
The entire board came on a consensus that diets don't work and they're bad for your health. That's the end of the debate. Right there.
That's the end.
Like, that's the end of the debate. There's nothing else. Like, but what's sad about this is I can't say that. I can't just say that because there's a lot of distrust in doctors. One, because of the CDC thing that I listed earlier, and two, there's a lot of racism and sexism in the medical industry that needs to be addressed in a whole other episode.
Oh, yes.
But it also ties in here because there's a lot of distrust, especially for doctors who don't care about people's like food and relationship with their bodies. And a lot of doctors cause, trigger warning here, a lot of doctors cause eating disorders and people to feel uncomfortable and unhappy in their own skin, in their own bodies. So that's a problem in itself too. So I wish I could say that like the National Institute of Health said diets are bad. We're done. That like thanks for coming. Like thanks for listening to today's episode. But I can't because that's something. And also the diet mania. Because like it's a whole, diets are a whole cultural thing now. Like diets are conversation starters. Like when you're talking to your family, like, oh yeah, I'm on this new juice cleanse.
Right.
It's like only celery and lemons. Like it's so great. It's a part of like our lives now to talk about how we're losing weight fast, how we're getting skinnier, how we're trying to like improve our skin through like our diets and like our 1,000-calorie diets, which absolutely make no sense. And also talking about how like the BMI, like we're always using like the BMI's legacy, like, oh yeah, you know, now I'm like I'm this weight, so like I'm underweight, I'm good. And also how we associate like or glorify people losing weight.
Absolutely.
Like, you know, we say like, oh, you look good because you lost X amount of pounds. Who gives a crap? That's like the most boring part about you is your weight. Who cares? That's like the most boring thing. But it's a whole cultural movement now, and it kind of stems from how the medical industry is deeply roped into diet culture, especially for like the BMI index, because the BMI standards profit off of weight loss pills. And a great example of this was like I don't remember how long ago it was, but when like the BMI standard shifted down, so a bunch of people who were in like the normal, and I'm using heavy air quotes there, like normal weight, like suddenly became like chronically obese. Like that doesn't make sense. Like if like you're into science, that don't make sense whatsoever. But B, it kind of like created this kind of like diet mania where people like immediately started like buying weight loss pills and supplements and shake weights and all this crap that you don't need, just so they could lower their lower their weight again. So like kind of like the end all for this like story here is diets are good in the short term, but they are so not sustainable anyway. Um, and on that note of like they're not sustainable, a lot of the studies that like are around fad diets have proven to like sustain weight loss for like a couple months, maybe a year or two. But most studies actually don't go past 2 years. Most studies don't. I don't actually think there is a weight loss study that goes over like more than 2 years. So scientifically, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
But the other like stat to look at, and this is kind of commonly used commonly used with the anti-diet community, is that 95% of diets fail. That's like the statistic right there. Boom. If 95% of diets fail, why are we starting like a bunch then?
Mm-hmm.
Why are new diets coming out? And again, it's rooted in our society.
Nor can we really expect diets to actually work when you're like switching from one diet to another diet to another diet to another diet. Like, how is your body going to adjust to that at all? Like, your body is built to make it so that you are healthy weight, that you are being in a safe bracket for your own like weight. Yeah. And definitely just going from diet to diet to diet is going to confuse your body, and it's going to cause effects that you're not even going to be expecting. And that is just a general observation. That's not like a scientific observation, even though it should be, but it should be, but just a general observation. Do what's best to take care of your body. Don't try to change your diet that you have been eating regularly this whole time for your whole life, and then suddenly you start changing what you eat and you start doing these diets, and it's like, how is your body going to adjust to that overall? And how is it going to make like, oh yeah, it's just going to be like, yeah, so we're starting this new thing, sounds cool, I'm in. Like, no, that's not how it's going to work.
Yeah. And the other thing too is like we can't treat weight as a behavior because it's not. It's just a number. And speaking personally from someone who had a really horrible relationship with their body, and food and eating in general, um, just the way that we talk to ourselves when we're in that state is atrocious. And for most people, it takes therapy, and psychiatric care. Like for me, I've been in therapy for a while now, and it takes a while. And I really empathize with people who have eating disorders or body dysmorphia. Those are real issues, and they do require psychiatric care or therapy. Basically, just mental health support. That's really what you need to reach out for. But we tend to think of losing weight as it's for your health. But for most people, we can't handle that. It's just, it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. And for a lot of us, losing a few pounds, oh yeah, you may like bring like weight off your joints or whatever crap doctors say. But up here, like up in our minds, we're demonizing ourselves. We're demonizing a part of us. And yeah, weight, it's a boring thing about us. But in today's culture, it is the only thing that matters about our health for some reason. And that is ingrained in us. And in a part of being anti-diet and a part of like accepting your own body for what it is and finding health at whatever size you are is unlearning part of that. And I have a bunch of resources to highlight.
Okay, go ahead.
The first thing I would probably really want you to read this book is The Anti-Diet by Christy Harrison. She is amazing, but but that book, even though the book talks about the roots of racism and sexism, in the beliefs about our food and bodies, to kind of like get you like hooked on that a little bit. Think about the way that like we talk about cultural foods being not healthy. Like for example, a lot of Hispanic foods are fried, and like oily, and they're like heavy in carbohydrates because they are like flour's cheap. A lot of those like tortillas, those are labeled as like carb heavy. They're like calorie heavy. That's why there's a lot of like the low carb tortillas And I had to say that because like it's not an actual tortilla, so I'm not even gonna like roll the R. It's crap. They're so like no, I'm not. They're a tortilla. Okay,
Tortilla.
Not dealing with that. I'm not dealing with that. But like think about how annoying that is, or how like a lot of other foods like beignets or like pies and things like that that are like pretty cultural, like our foods across multiple different cultures, but they're all labeled as like fatty, fried, greasy, like heart cloggers, whatever crap. It's like those are all very negative and stigmatizing words that are tied to those foods and ultimately our cultures.
And really, that just uplifts the actual racism that is rooted in fat phobia. You know,
Yes,
we're
it's that.
circling all around, all around. And I
Yeah.
just want to go back to one thing that you did mention. As much as we are internalizing those sort of messages about our food and our culture, it's also just about the fact that we are internalizing all these messages about how horrible it is to be fat, or like, ugh, I hated saying that. I hated saying that so much, but
It's so bad. It really is.
but we are internalizing it, especially within just normal conversations. Like, it's so common within minority communities to just have your parent talk about how much you've gained weight, how much you've lost weight, and it's just like the
Mhm.
most awful thing to experience, because obviously if your parents saying it, it obviously has to be true, is what kind of goes through your mind then. So that's where I had my own experience, looking at the BMI, just that thing,
Ugh.
and listening to my mother talking about how I need to lose weight, to the point of where I literally looked like a stick because I was fasting for 16 hours straight, and I was,
Oh my god.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
so sorry.
yeah, I was fasting for 16 hours straight, and I was trying not to eat as much as I could, and I was trying to like snack, for example, instead of having whole meals. And we don't really understand the big impact that really can cause on somebody's mental health. And I'm not claiming that I did have an eating disorder, but I'm still, working through those sort of internalized thoughts that I had about my own body, thinking, like, just looking down at my stomach and be like, wow, that's really disgusting. And that, of
Mhm.
course, is where the mental health aspect of it all comes into play.
Yeah. And just to like really get into kind of, and I am like for those listening, I am going to talk about like calories and numbers for a second. So if you're not with that, you're not at that like stage, skip a couple minutes. Um, when we're like comparing the energy needed by like different tissues and like organs in the body, like when you just think, okay, let's think about the three like most important things: kidneys, heart, brain. Kidneys need around 400 calories a day. The heart needs around 400 calories a day. And the brain needs around 240 calories a day. Let's do some quick math here. That's already 800. I'm stupid.
Don't ask me. I don't
That's
know.
so much more.
I don't
Whatever.
know.
That's over 1,000 calories. Let's calm that. Okay, that's over 1,000 calories right there. And most people try to stop at 1,000 calories per day. There's like the horrible 800 calorie diet, or the 1,200, 1,600. But most of our organs need a lot of calories. We need calories to live. Like that's just how it works.
Right.
So for the people who are saying, yeah, go on like a 1,600 calorie deficit, that's a diet. That's not how that works. Um, but if you are like genuinely interested in improving your health, instead of trying to restrict the foods that are deemed unhealthy, add in foods that are a little more nutrient dense instead of taking stuff away.
Right.
Um, but before you can even get to that, the first thing that you have to do is unlearn diet culture, and it takes a while. Um, One of the ways that I like to kind of describe this is like every social issue. Like let's say like we're all on a belt that's like moving forward towards like this inevitable like horrible thing. Whether that's like becoming like a person who internalized a lot of racist values or sexist values or whatever. Like you're getting the point. We're all kind of slowly moving towards that, and it's our job to stand up and walk off the belt. Now, we can't do that without recognizing all the things that are tied to racism and sexism. And that includes fat phobia, because fat phobia is inherently tied to sexism and racism. So if you're not acknowledging what you have learned from the diet culture, you're just kind of like standing on the belt. Like you're standing on the belt, you're like, hey, I'm gonna start getting off it, but you're really not.
Right.
So a part of being an anti-racist is also being anti-diet, because it is a huge part of racism, and also how we discriminate and look at the BIPOC community differently from a health standpoint.
Absolutely. And another thing is to just realize how much social media can also play into just fat phobia and upholding those standards for people. As we were mentioning earlier, there's definitely just that comparison when we look at other people on social media and saying that you want that. And that even is just past weight, but we can talk about social media all day. Actually, we did talk about social media and the negatives. You should check that out. Check that episode out. You know, a quick plug. But
it is a good episode.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and of course we were just talking about all the things that you don't see. So really, we have been talking about all the things that have been wrong with the fat phobia culture and diet culture. So what are some things that we do need to know about, just weight loss in general?
Yeah, so honestly, if you're trying to improve your health, you don't really want to focus on weight loss. Unless you have a genuine medical condition that actually requires you to lose weight for X reason and is supported by like research, and it isn't your doctor or your physician being biased against you, you actually don't need to focus on weight loss as being a way to improve your health, because weight in itself is actually a really small factor compared to your overall health. A lot of the bigger factors that actually impact your health much greater are like sleep patterns, stress levels, and physical activity. Now, I'm not saying that you have to like be a marathon runner for physical activity, like just getting in like some activity a little bit every day. You don't have to work out 2 hours a day. That's not it. Unless you like that, but you don't have to force yourself to do it. Yoga, going on walks, hiking, that is enough if that's for you. Getting an adequate amount of sleep. We have normalized being burnt out and not getting enough sleep, staying up too late. Like really listen to your body here. Try and get those 8 to 10 hours. You do need it. Like you really do. Like your body needs time to recover and rest, and your brain needs a lot of time to literally wash itself away. There's a whole process which I can't explain because it is way too complicated. I barely know what I'm talking about. Where our brain, in very, very, very simplified terms, cleans itself. That process cannot happen and will be disrupted if we don't get adequate amount of sleep. And also diet patterns. Not being on a diet, but actually getting the adequate amount of calories that you need in a day. Because we have glorified, oh yeah, I skip my lunch.
Like, no.
Nobody cares about that. Like, nobody cares about that. Because when you skip meals, what typically tends to happen after? You get, in, I don't know, you just get, you kind of want to, do somebody harm because you're that, you're that hungry. That's not a good thing. That means your body is in, flight or fight response and is going to kill somebody to get food. That's so not a good thing. And that's also not a good thing for your mental health. Oh, and that's, of course, another one of the bigger factors is mental health. If you're not taking care of your mental health, how do you really think your physical health is going to react? It's not. Those are connected. They're hand in hand. So if you're not taking care of your mental health and you're focusing only on lowering your weight, that's not going to happen.
Right.
Good luck. Not only are you not going to lose weight, but you're also going to destroy your health in itself.
Absolutely.
Mental health is everything. It really is. Which is hilarious because this is what this podcast is about.
Preach. Preach.
It's true. Confident people take care of their mental health and seek mental health support. Thank you.
Period. And that's the end of the discussion.
If you've seen the Kim Kardashian thing about the advice for women in business, I don't care what she has to say. Okay, I don't care how rich she is, whatever. Listen to me. You got to take care of your mental health. Period. That's it.
Period. That's it. And y'all are doing the first
There's nothing
step.
else.
Y'all are doing the first step by listening to this podcast. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
but actually, they kind of are, because you have to change. You know what? Pause. One of the things that I kind of resonate with about like what Kim said is you have to surround yourself with people. That's where it stops. Not people that work, people that protect their mental health.
Yes.
Because when you protect your mental health, you're also protecting your physical health. And part of this is like the community aspect. So technically, you kind of are doing something.
Nice.
But yeah, that's the only thing I resonate with. You have to surround yourself with people, and that's it.
Just
that's
people.
All I resonate
with. And we also just have to keep in mind that if you don't take care of your mental health, you're also not taking care of the people that are around you. Because if you are personally struggling, then there's going to be a whole bunch of stress, and you're not going to be able to physically just be around your friends, be around your family, and be your whole self, to where they can make sure that you are okay and that they can be treated well by you, and just so many other environmental factors that goes into it.
But yeah, I think that's kind of it. There's not really, just protect your mental health. That's really what matters.
Absolutely. And I definitely second that, for sure. So just closing out this episode, it's been a wonderful episode. Thank you, Chris, for coming on. You have been amazing, providing your amazing personality as well as the facts behind everything. So yeah, you can find us on our website at foreverbloom.org, and you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, all at foreverblooming.org, as well as Twitter at foreverbloom.org. And Chris, I almost called you Michael. Why did I almost call you Michael? Chris, can you tell us where you can find INWILL at?
Yes. Okay, so you can find your Instagram. That's kind of like, look at me having a blanket. I'm sorry. You can find us on our Instagram, INWILL Studios, INWILL Studios. We do a lot of stuff on there, and a lot of Instagram lives and events and all that jazz. I forgot our Twitter. I think it's INWILL Studios as well. I'm like 99% sure.
I think so as well. I think so as well.
I don't remember all the Instagram handles. But yeah, our Instagram is like where we're most active. We also have a TikTok at INWILL Studios as well. Yeah, you can find all that information on our Instagram. So just like remember our Instagram. That's like all you gotta do.
Awesome.
You can find our website and everything on there.
Awesome. Thank you. So some more closing remarks. The research and transcript for this episode, which I super do advise you to check out. The research is on our website in our podcast section. Our podcast guest form, where you can be a guest like Chris here, is in our podcast section as well, if you want to be on Forever Blooming, as well as our audience spotlight form, where you can ask questions to be featured in one of our episodes. Please email us at management@foreverbloom.org. Almost forgot our email. Let us know your thoughts, questions, comments, and concerns, and how we can improve the podcast, because we love hearing from you. Be sure to check out fborg.card.co, and that is card with 2 R's, for all of our easy, accessible links. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, rate us on Spotify, and share with your friends if you enjoyed this episode. And lastly, have a great day, afternoon, or night whenever you're listening to this. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.